everyone. Welcome back to another episode of WorkYogi Diaries. This is your host, Santosh Shiva. Every week, I bring you conversations with people who are masters of their craft or are on a journey to be one. Hopefully, we take away some strategies, some tips, and some ideas to help us take our game to the next level. In today's episode, we explore the pro and cons of a sales career. And for that, I have with me a dear friend and ex-colleague, Santosh Iyer, who currently serves as a senior vice president and a head of strategic account in a leading IT consulting firm. His journey is fascinating and also relevant to this topic because he is one of the few people I know who has spent time in multiple domains within a corporate career before arriving at sales. So it is natural we get to tap on his experience and ask this fundamental question. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing to it. Hit like if you like the video, and do please leave us your comments and feedback in the comment section below and let us know if you took something away. Let's dig in. Santosh, welcome to
Hey,
WorkYogi Diaries.
hey, Santosh. Good to be here. Thank you for including me.
We are back again
Yes, in another avatar.
in another avatar. Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you on various topics, definitely the topic that we're going to cover today is basically around, sales and sales career and what are the pro and cons of it. And I thought you would be a perfect candidate to talk to because your work journey is cuts across many domains in a corporate world. Not many people have done that. Like my career has purely been sales, and so I thought it'd be great to learn from you and your experiences. But before that, let me uh, hand it back to you and allow you to do a quick personal introduction, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. Thanks, SK. So my name is Santosh Iyer. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, with my wife, my 12-year-old daughter, and my dog. And I work in Emphasis. It's a leading IT services organization, and been with them for quite a while now. It's 21 years now, running on 21 years. Yes.
Wow.
And before that, I have worked in consulting with PricewaterhouseCoopers and in supply chain consulting with IT technologies. And with an emphasis, I've had the good fortune of playing multiple roles, like you remarked, SK. So I joined as a BA. I did delivery management. I was in HR, which is not very common. I was a salesperson for a while, and now I'm a strategic client partner. So it's been an interesting journey. And to your point, I would also enjoy talking to you about this topic simply because, like you said, we've come from different worlds, and you've been in sales all your life. So I do a fair bit of the learning myself, for sure. So
Well,
that's a little bit about me.
all right. 21 years. That's why, when I was when I was growing, my father used to work for a public sector company in India, and they used, the general careers in those companies were like lifetime. And I used to think, I don't think I will ever see that in my generation, but here you go, 21 years. That is amazing.
Now, the
That is amazing.
interesting thing is that it's the good part is that it's not 21 years doing the same thing though, right? So it is doing five different jobs across four different geographies in the world.
Mm,
Now, I worked in India, worked in Southeast Asia, worked in Europe, worked in three different places in the US,
yeah,
and across these four or five different jobs. So it has always been interesting. Every couple of years, I've had a change in job. It just happens that my employer is the same,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's it. That has kept it fun.
Yeah, and I was with Emphasis for about 11 years, and I didn't think I would be in any company for that long. And I think also with a company like Emphasis that went through so many inorganic growths, you tend to also get exposed to new opportunities. So yeah, I completely get what you're saying. So um, jumping into the topic of the day, which is kind of using your work journey to understand a little bit about the pro and cons of a career in sales. So maybe we should start with that. What? So I know you had certain choices in your career, which was not sales when you started, but then you ended up in sales. So let's hear about why, and why did you not choose sales in the beginning, and why later?
No, that's a great question. So, like I said, 21 years in emphasis, but a good 14, 15 of those years were kept studiously staying away from sales. So I joined as a BA, and then went into delivery management, and I've been told many times, hey, Santosh, you should be in the selling team. Why don't you join my team, and so on. Has happened at least 5 or 6 times during about the 5 year period just before I actually joined sales. And when I joined HR, people were like, "What are you doing in HR? Why did you just come into sales?" So I had certain notions about what sales is, right? Misperceptions, I would call them. So of course, keeping aside the popular caricature of sales being, hey, calling somebody to buying something they don't need. Okay, the used car salesman, right? Keeping aside those those kind of caricatures, right? More seriously, from an emphasis, from an industry perspective, right? I associated sales with, hey, you need to run after these numbers, right? You have these
Mm,
quotas, right? And when you're speaking to somebody, you have the quota at the back of your mind. You need to be compulsively extroverted. You need to network. A lot of that is inauthentic networking.
mm,
Whining and dining of customers, prospects. And the whole idea of dressing to impress. The whole, it
mm,
almost seemed like a charade, right? Sometimes, and
mm,
my mind was mixed up with all of these ideas in terms of, if you're selling, this is what you have to do,
mm,
right? But eventually, as I grew up in my career, right, in delivery, in HR, I realized that I'm selling anyway. I am selling, right?
mm,
Just that who I'm selling to and what I'm selling is different, right? So
mm,
when I was managing delivery, I would have to sell investment ideas to my company, right? I would have to sell why delivery is going well to my company and to my client, right? In delivery and HR, I have to sell my company to new recruits, right? Who we are getting to the organization. So I am selling nevertheless. I mean, regardless, right? And even when we were in delivery, we sell ideas to the customer. We help build a business too.
mm,
So then I realized that it's not about selling stuff they don't need, right? Nobody's going to buy stuff they don't need, especially in high involvement purchases. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to cover that sometime in this conversation. So they are smart people on the client side. They fairly well know what their problem is, right? You have to figure out how to solve it for them, and the solution is not always technical. You may solve their financial problem, right? You may solve their organization problem, their people problem, their technical problem, of course. So you are basically a partner for them, and that was a totally different proposition, right?
mhm,
Solving problems is always fun for me. So then I got into sales, and I realized that, what, it is so far different from what I thought it was. And now my current role is more a strategic client partner kind of a role. So I do have a sales team under me, and it is just an extension of the same problem, in a larger scale, right? So we'll talk about that, but I hope that explains what happened in the past.
totally, totally. And for the folks who are listening, I think just to give a context around, in the corporate world, sales roles have so many titles. And just to give a bit of a context about your role, your company is organized around strategic accounts, and it's run as almost like a P&L, independent P&L, and you basically are responsible for that. Just so that for viewers who are listening to this, just for clarity perspective, because I've seen client partner is such a loosely used title in the industry, just to make sure that it is what, just reflect what you're doing. So
Right. That is correct.
perfect. So so your route to the current role, and maybe there are a lot of there is a common belief or a common agreement in the industry saying that salespeople make great CEOs. Um, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there is a common belief. I don't know if the salespeople who propagate this myth.
They're good at selling.
Yeah. So, and so in your journey as well, you've spent in different areas. You came into sales and then finally have moved into kind of a a P&L. Uh, so was that important? Would you have been successful in this role, or would it have been different if, let's say, you had not spent time in sales?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, I love the statement, right? The salespeople make great CEOs. So I can see that my current CEO has been a salesperson in the past. Outstanding guy, amazing guy, and has a understands the pulse of the customer.
Mm,
Understands the speed with which the industry is moving. So I can relate to that totally, right?
mm,
So if I look at it, right, one of the reasons why I joined sales was also that, and how much can I know about the company if I'm not exposed to the revenue pressures of the company, right?
mm,
When we talk about Apple or Google or whatever, right, they're defined by the revenue, right? They're defined by, oh, Apple is a, and their market capitalization, right? When we talk about a company, we talk about, hey, what is the revenue last quarter, the revenue last year, right?
yeah.
We don't talk about, hey, what is their cost of sales or what are their cost of delivery. They are important,
Mm,
right? And they
mm,
form your way to the bottom line. But revenue is almost like the identity of a company, right? So the idea that as a CEO, you have to keep growing the revenue base, and what you're doing is you're giving predictability to your investors, right? In terms of your share, your revenue, your market capitalization, your ability to keep your future secure. You're not mortgaging your future for your current, right? So you're growing revenue today and then making sure that there's a runway to grow it tomorrow, right?
mm,
So that's what you're doing. So you're creating predictability in revenue while at the underlying, underneath the hood, right? There's so many changes, right? The clients that you're serving, may be doing well, may not be doing well. You're partly responsible for it. The industry is moving, competitive intensity is changing. There's disruptions, but what you're doing is you're keeping, the steadiness, right, from an investor perspective, right?
yeah.
So this is impossible to imagine without, having an exposure to what does it take to grow revenue,
Mm,
right? So from my role perspective as well, it's exactly the same, right? If I see myself as the CEO for a significant piece, right, of my company's business, and then how do I make sure that I'm relevant for my customer, right? Am I solving the right problems for them, right? And in doing so, right, am I doing it profitably, right? Am I doing it in such a way that my long term interests are protected while their long term interests are protected, right? And then showing that growth over a period of time. So I cannot imagine doing this role without having been a salesperson myself, because at the end of the day, 100, 200, 300, whatever your sales strength is, right, of a company, you would have the back end of the company, which is including the delivery, right, which is probably like 20 times that, right? But this small band of people are actually the ones who are bringing in everything through the funnel that is going to be defining the existence of the rest of the company, right? So not knowing that critical function, right, would mean that it's impossible for you to understand the dynamics behind how your company can sustain. So no, I would think it's impossible for me to have been doing my role now without having done a sales job myself.
yeah. And you called out an important point in your earlier conversation when you described your different roles, and where selling was already a part of your job. And I think it's important to also call out a distinction in that context: is there is sales as a job and there is sales as a activity, right? And and I think sales as a job, well, the reality is the ultimate measurement of whether you are an effective salesperson or not is the number, right? And you could be the most interesting person, you could be the smartest person in the room, but if the scoreboard is not moving, you're not relevant, right? um, and then there is a sales as a activity, right? And so that's an interesting point, because for most people who are working in an organization, no matter whether you have a sales role or not, your sales activity finally contributes to whether this individual or this role is able to succeed. And that comes to brings me to another interesting point, which is empowerment, right?
Mm.
And so a lot of salespeople in a lot of companies struggle with being empowered, although the role is what is so critical to get your scoreboard ticking. A lot of salespeople don't have voice in a corporate world, and a lot of the voice is necessarily with the other functions. It could be corporate strategy, it could be engineering, or it could be something else. So, have you had to deal with that?
So I can understand the question because I speak to peers of mine in the industry, and I know some companies are organized in a different way. So in my current company, for example, very clearly it's almost like the customer's voice, no matter where you hear it, right, is what is amplified, and it kind of ricochets
Mm.
throughout the rest of the company, right? So I would say frontline functions. It could be sales, it could be delivery, it could be whoever is meeting the client in whatever form, right? So I remember, I forget the name of the picture, but I think it's called a homunculus, but it's, I remember the name, sorry, I forget the name of the picture, right? But it's a picture of a human, right? But in the form where it shows, like for example the ear, right? How much of the brain does auditory signals occupy? How much of the brain does visual signals occupy, right? So if you look at your brain function, and what percentage of the brain is allocated to what, right? You can, and if you draw the human being in that form, you will see the human with huge eyes, huge ears, huge nose, huge hands, right? Small, chest, right? Small legs. So wherever the sensory organs are, right, and whatever is sensing the external environment that gets a disproportionate amount of real estate in the brain, right? So very similar. Our organization is kind of structured like that, right? Whoever is frontlining, whether it is a solutions person, a delivery person, a salesperson, their voice is given a disproportionate amount of attention, simply because it reflects, it's a proxy for what your customers and what the external world is saying, right? So fortunately, I have not had to deal with too much of that, and I've spent a lot of time in my current company. So my experiences prior to that, also have been fairly good actually, right? But I do talk to peers of mine, some of whom work in companies where the back end, it's a very profit focused, cost focused, and back end is, so they have to figure out their ways of navigating
Yeah.
that environment, right? They still have to solve the customers' problems, but they have to figure out, they may have to keep certain departments in good stead, and so on.
Yeah.
For me, it's just about, hey, keep your eyes on the customer, the rest will work itself out.
Yeah. And I guess that is probably what it means to talk about organizational transformation in some sense. That when people talk about, hey, transforming a company from point A to point B, for it to be successful, it really means what you're just describing, which is to leverage the all the sensors of the organization. So as a company, you're learning, right, from those inputs that are coming in, and same thing with the personal, at a personal level, right? Because one of the things that I'm beginning to realize is that how do you use this distinction, like when there is new information that comes your way, which is contrary to your belief system or contrary to what you already know. How do you deal with this information? It's uncomfortable information. How do you deal with it? And I think what I'm beginning to realize is learnability, right? Learnability is the ability to look at this information for what it is and see if I have to change something in my own internal muscle, or do I have to learn something new to deal with this information, right? And that's kind of aligned with what you're also describing.
No, makes total sense. I mean, if you sense and respond to the environment that you're in, right? Also be open to hearing about long term trends that you may have missed, right? Or things that you have a blind spot towards, and somebody else is opening that blind spot, right? Or maybe a disruption is on its way, and underestimate the disruption. So if you are, and it's a great analogy with respect to individuals, right? People who are like burying their heads in the sand, right, and willing away the realities of, they are going to be extinct sooner or later, right? I mean, they irrelevant sooner or later. So companies are exactly that way. I mean, so many different companies that we know of today, but who have had so many pivots that they've had to make, right? Amazon was a seller of books, right,
Yeah.
for example. So what companies do and how they change and respond, and they look at the pandemic, right?
Mm.
It in the famous phrase of K-shaped recovery, right? So there are companies that got themselves aligned to what's happening, post pandemic, the fact that the world has changed forever, And there are
Yeah.
companies who just wish and pray that and hope that, hey, this is a passing phase and things will go back to what they consider normal, right? But the normal's gone, right? And companies that foresaw the fact that this normal is going away or wanted to capitalize on this while it is happening have a different trajectory completely from the companies that chose to not ignore it. Nobody ignored it, but chose to just power through it and then hope to come back to where they were. And some industries, look at the airlines industry, look at the cruise industry, changed forever, right? I was watching a video on the airlines industry and how every aspect of it, right? Who's flying, what they're flying for, when they're going to fly, how much they're willing to pay, right? And what are the steps before and after everything is changed. Everything is changed. It's almost like a new market they're navigating. So, you're exactly right. I mean, learnability, organizational learnability, and by extension, individual learnability, because organizations are nothing
Yeah.
but a collection of individuals. Yeah, that's critical. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So coming back to sales itself, right? Our topic being anchored around what are the pro and cons of sales, and definitely there are a lot of pros in what you've just described, which is you are on the front end of the organization, and one of the metaphors I've heard about sales profession when I started my career was that sales people are the warrior class of the corporate world, and it sounds cool. It sounds cool if you, especially if your mindset is that of a warrior, which is conquering new territories, representing your tribe to new places. So that's all the big pros of it. There's a lot of empowerment. And I think it's closest to probably what an entrepreneurial role could be in a company. If you're delivering good, if you're not delivering, you're out. So those are the pros, right? Now, you also spend time in other functions, and so let's talk about some of the cons, of being in sales, right? And so yeah, let's get into that.
Sure. Let me think about how to phrase it. Right. So, so warrior class is a great analogy, right? We even use terms like hunter, right, to describe somebody who goes out and finds new clients and so on, right? And we also have like farming hunters, right?
Yeah,
People who have a base, but then also have to find new business and so on. So yes, the analogy is carried on to mainstream language, right? In these industries. But one of the things that in the sales role specifically, it's true of most roles if you're senior, but the sales role specifically is you it's this you forget what's happening in the past simply because it's irrelevant, right?
mm,
So hey, you're nearing the last week of the quarter. You're no longer speaking about the quarter because it's gone, right?
yeah,
And you don't have you don't like savor the moment and cherish what you've achieved and so on. No, there's no time because you've moved on to the next period of time, the next challenge, what's coming up, right? And complacency has no place. So complacency is a negative word, but
mm,
oh, stop and smell the roses and whatever, right? There's no
yeah,
time for that, right? Because if you smell the roses, the next threat or the next opportunity is you miss it, right?
yeah, yeah,
So this constant state of motion, compulsive motion, right?
mm,
Always moving forward. So once we had an interesting conversation, we were talking about, hey, what do people who are happiness experts and well-being experts talk, right?
mm,
And what do certain job functions call for, right?
mm,
So it's interesting to see that, and then how to navigate the world we are in, right? So what does happiness function say? Oh, be grateful, count your blessings, look at what you have, right?
mm,
Don't desire more than what you have. That's the route to happiness, right?
mm,
Take time to do things that are not directly connected to your only your profession, right? So things, everything about slowing down and about appreciating what you have and not desiring more than what you have, and those are what happiness experts talk. And if you look at the sales world, right, it could be a study in contrast, right?
mm,
you know Forget what's gone, right? Doesn't matter how good it was, right? Just keep just keep moving forward. So you know hey, you made a big number last year, so you got a even bigger number this year, right?
mm,
So bigger, more, right? So it can tend to be the opposite. It can tend to be
mm,
the opposite, right?
yeah,
So we live in a capitalistic world, right? It is what it is, right? Our companies and our individuals are defined by size and growth, right? And yes, this system has merits. We know that, right?
Mm,
Capitalism has proven itself time and again, right? So how do we function in this
mm,
environment, right? And still retain our balance, right? Still retain our personal sense of peace and calm, right?
mm,
And what to get yourself attached to and what to stay detached from, right?
mm,
I have found that I don't need to channel the greed in me, right? I don't have that much greed in me, right? To channel, right? I find it easier to channel self-respect and pride, right?
mm,
So if I'm taking care of a particular set of clients, right, or a portfolio for my company, right, I see myself as the person who is entrusted to solve the problems
mm,
there,
mm,
right? Who's entrusted to help that client achieve what they're going to achieve, right? And that's going to help more people in the world. That's going to help reduce wastage. That's going to help do a lot of good things, right?
mm,
If and my sense of purpose is driven from doing that as well as possible, right? And then having my team feel successful, right? My team feels that they've accomplished something that is meaningful, right?
mm,
The I don't channel the, hey, this number has to be bigger, oh, my money has to be more, right? Because different people are different, and I don't find that in myself, right? But both of these lead to the same end state, right? so
mm.
so from a perspective of doing right by the client, doing right by my team, right? So that is how I make peace with this difference. And I know you asked about cons, and I thought I'll focus on this con
Yeah.
because this is almost an existential fundamental con, right? And how I deal with it. I hope that answered your question.
It does. It does. And gold in what you said, right? Gold in what you described. Um, so one of the cons in what you're saying is that this job is a very result oriented, very black and white role, right? In other professions or other jobs in the company, there could be gray areas. But in sales, the source scorecard is the only truth that one has to live by. And sometimes it takes time to realize that also. So, my own, being in sales for a long time, there are times where I've had to remind myself that rest of the enablement that one is a enablement. Finally, you're measured by the number, and you could see it as a con, or could see it as a reality of the job. And I like the way you are approaching how to make that reality a lot more palatable, right? And because I think if you look at the balance scorecard approach, and I love that whole distinction that's used in balance scorecard, which is you have lead indicators and lag indicators. And if you continue to focus on lag indicators, you're likely to miss the lag indicator, right? So I like the way you are approaching this, which is, hey, focus on the lead indicators, the activity, the value creation, and the lag indicators. Yes, they are important, but they will get taken care of in the eventual outcome. But if you're going to be focused on making money and your commissions, and because of that get numbers, you're probably going to be in a hospital by the time you're 40s, right? Hypertension and diabetes, and is that worth it, right? All that money you're going to make, is that worth it? So that's a lot of gold in what you just said. And
And sorry,
go
please
ahead, go
finish.
ahead.
No, I just wanted to, the way I like the way you put it, right? Which is league and ladder indicator. It's a great way of looking at it, right? Am I doing the right things versus did I get the right outcome just,
Mm,
just in the recent past, right? Am I doing the right things is the right question. And one of the things that this is not a con, it's kind of a pro, but I thought it's important to bring out, right? See, when you use the word value, right?
mm,
That's a great thing, right? We're focusing on value. So the value as seen by the customer, value as seen by your team, value as seen by your company, right? So when you are creating that value and you're articulating that value, you're not, everything else is consequence, right? The money that
mm,
you get is consequence, but you also start realizing the value that you're adding, right? And you become more fair to yourself, right? So I used to be a martyr in my delivery days, right? In my previous company, I used to be a martyr, which is like, what, hey, do great stuff and don't expect to be paid for it and don't expect to be reward for it. It's
mm,
fine, there's somebody will take care of it. No, right? So you realize that you are in the business of adding value, and you realize
mm,
that people around you appreciate you for that value and expect that value from you. And you realize that, hey, listen, there is, if it's in a capitalistic marketplace, right? So you need to also have a sense of your own value. And so then you also take care of your financial aspects, wealth building and all of that in parallel, right? without having that as your primary focus, right?
Mm.
You realize that you're part of a system where when you create value, right, you are valued, right?
Yeah.
And you learn to look at both sides of the equation. So it's not as if you're doing this to the exclusion of some of your personal, wealth goals or financial security goals, right? It is coming along with it. It's coming as a corollary of it, but it's not coming by focusing on it, right? Like
Yeah.
you said, like
Yeah.
a lag indicator, right? So I hope that
Yeah.
kind of
Absolutely.
adds more nuance.
Yeah, and in the sports, the world of sports, and a lot of times in sales training, world of sports is always a close cousin. And in the world of sports, if you read or hear about the coaching principles, you're going to be told focus on the technique, focus on, like, if you're a cricketer, they're going to be telling you how to move your bat in a particular way, and do that repeatedly, and not focus on scoring the run. The run happens when the bat hits the ball. And so, yeah, I think makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And so coming, it's a good point to talk about the perception of what is adding value from a sales perspective, right? And I'll tell you why I'm bringing this topic, because I think sales has had a has there is a legacy view of what value sales adds, right? And which is pushing a certain commodity or well defined products in the market, and this creates a certain mindset. And what has happened over a period of time is that if you ask a salesperson what's the most important thing to be successful in sales, guess what you'll hear. Let's see if you and I are thinking along the same lines here. What would you say?
If you look at a traditional view, if that's what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
I get reminded of that. Is that Glengarry Glen Ross, the movie where they have all of these car salesmen and their names are on the board, and you'll still see them in car sales dealerships today, right? You'll have their names and you'll have how many cars they sold, right? Public shaming, right? It's like I have to get that number to about 10, about 15, right? And then you can see that. So that becomes a single-minded focus, right? You know, don't care if the customer is going to come back. Don't care if the customers, actually going to like, or is this going to go back to support and increase my cost? Nothing, right? It's about, hey, this month, am I hitting the 15 number that this obnoxious boss wants, right? So, um, so I would look at it as, what, hey, what are you selling, right? What are you selling? Which means if you're selling products like cars, right, commodities like cars, right, or you're selling popsicles, right, in a stand, right, or you're a TV infomercial person, right, or what I call experience or services selling, right. So broadly, if I look at low involvement purchases is what we were taught in MBA, right. Customer doesn't really care and think deeply of it, right. It's an impulse, right. You satisfy that impulse instantaneously. You feel like it's a hot day, you feel like having a popsicle, and there's a stand right there, there's another stand right there, right. Hey, do I buy one or not? And maybe a small action by them, right? Maybe another customer drinking something, a nice picture, or them offering up to, hey, it's a, we buy two get one free or whatever, right. It just makes you move and buy it, right. And you walk 10 paces past that store and you forget about it, right. You're not going to retrace your steps and go back to the popsicle stand. They are trying to capitalize on that impulse. Or a TV salesperson, right? They show this nice sharp knife that cuts through wood like it's butter, or cuts through tomatoes without extracting a drop of juice or whatever, right. And you feel, oh, I wish I had that knife, right. They want to translate that moment into buying. Single click, just call us right now, we'll give you $50 off, right. And if that moment passes, you switch the channel or just go to the bathroom, it's gone, right. You never needed it. So we are not in that world, right. We are in the world of high involvement purchase, right, where the customer, it's a huge amount of money, customer spending, they have an important problem to solve, their careers are defined by it, their company's futures are defined by it, right. And so they are interested in taking a decision for the right reasons, or it's a decision that has import in the future, right. So for us, it's a vastly different game, and it's not about, you're not going to sell once and forget the customer, right. Our entire lives are devoted to an important customer, right. So then it's about long term view. It's about making sure they understand why the way we solve the problem is better for them, right. And many times the way we understand the problem is actually adding clarity and nuance to the way they understand the problem,
Yep.
right. So I know it's a long answer to a short question, but you know I see this as a spectrum, and we playing on that end of the spectrum. And I'm sure we'll get to discuss more about that end. But I hope it adds
Yeah.
some pointers to what you were looking for.
Yeah. So great. And the reason I brought this up was because in terms of skills, right? And uh, so what has happened in my view is that because sales roles have evolved from commodity selling, if you look at sales books, traditional sales books, a lot of focus is on relationship building. And if you, I don't know if you've been interviewing people recently, and I've been, and I've found I'm finding that if I ask the question, what is the most single important factor to be successful in sales in today's world, the answer comes back 8 out of 10 times: relationships. So my next question is, okay, if relationships are important, everyone is building that relationship. How does it differentiate you, right? And so that's my first question that I ask myself, and I'm asking all of us. And the second question is, what does relationship mean? So the most common response I get is relationship is that feel good between two people. If the person is talking to you well, giving you time, that's good relationship for a lot of people. But the reality is, in sales, that's not a good relationship.
Agree.
What do you think about that? Do you agree with that?
No, no, 100%, 100% agree. Let me take it out of sales to make the illustration more clear. Like, there are two doctors in your neighborhood, right? One doctor, you know, understands your sickness, gives you a medicine, and you get cured, right? The other doctor, chats with you
Yeah.
and is real friends, remembers your favorite movie names, and asks about your family and all of that. But every time you go to him or her, you have to go back again, right?
Yeah.
And they never seem to get to the root of the problem, right? So obvious, right? Which one we're going to choose, right?
Yeah.
We going to the doctor for a purpose, right? So relationship without value is meaningless, right?
Mm.
It's just feel good, right? You'll break bread together and that's it, right? So value is the fundamental basis of relationship, right?
Mm.
Beyond that, right? If given that value is equal, right, then you have, then relationships do matter. Like, for example, if a customer is describing a problem, right, and you understand the problem, you help solve it. It's a technically difficult problem to solve and all of that, right? But if you want to uncover things like, hey, listen, you know, maybe they're new at their job, right?
Mm.
Maybe they're having pressure to prove something, or maybe there's a deadline by which they're going to accomplish something, or there is some, maybe they're competing with somebody, right? And they want to
Mm.
be like, so you will understand these nuances better as your relationship improves and you understand the context of their problem better. Or they might even give you, hints around, hey, listen, this is not going to get budgeted now. This is the problem. This is where they're spending money. So they will give you all the context around the problem better if you have a relationship. And then you understand, hey, this is their political problem. This is their organization problem. Those without those, your solution would be unidimensional. It just,
Mm.
it's like, Googling, right? Or it's just getting a solution to that one thing, but you don't understand the complexity behind what they're facing, including personal stuff that is happening right in the mix.
Yeah.
So relationship will unlock those things, but
Mm.
they won't tell you all of this if they don't believe you can solve the problem,
Yeah.
right? So fundamental belief is that you can solve the problem, means that value is the foundation for them to even open up, right?
Yeah.
Sharing a drink or going to a restaurant is something else, right?
Yeah.
But that is like a second or third layer on top of the foundational value. So couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And couple of a lot of gold in there, right? So a couple of things. One is, I remember when I started my sales career, my then mentor had told me that if your customer is not taking action based on what you're suggesting, then you have no relationship. So this was in response to a review that I was in, and I was pretty early in my sales career, and they were reviewing. Okay, so what is your relationship with this buyer in this account? And I was saying, I have a good relationship. He talks to me. He spends a lot of time with me. And this guy laughed. My mentor, my coach, laughed and said, "Did he take any action to what you said? Did he even suggest something?" Right? And I was like scratching my head and say, "Actually, you know what? I never had the courage to tell him anything." and and actually that comes to my an important point that and that happens to all of us, right? There's a there one of the that's a con in sales. I keep talking about cons in sales. One of the cons in sales is you can't survive in your comfort zone. And if you're not comfortable to ask, you're probably in the wrong profession. And it is uncomfortable to ask. I mean, your friends. It could be friends. It could be you built a relationship with some person in another company, and you might think you're friends and you like each other. But sometimes you got to pop the question: Hey, do you have a budget, or do you have a requirement, or do you like to buy from me? Is there a contract in the next 30 days? And that's a very uncomfortable part of our jobs, don't you think?
Correct. I completely agree. Because that is one thing that I myself had to kind of overcome,
Mm,
right? Because if you don't ask, you won't get, right?
yeah,
And asking doesn't mean, see, we always think about asking as a personal favor, right? Or we think about it as an obligation. It is not, right?
yeah,
It's a question of them taking a business decision, you take a business decision, and it's like, hey, is
yeah,
this real, right? Does this help you, right? So I realized that I had to like a little
yeah,
bit of thick skin to develop. And again, that and taking rejection, right? If they
yeah,
say no, that's not personal either, right?
hmm, yeah,
Because many times hearing rejection, hearing no, right,
mm,
saying that they felt somebody else's solution was better, somebody else, that is hard to swallow, because in other roles, right, you don't deal with probabilistic stuff, right? If you're delivering something, or you're making a budget, or you're doing accounting, right, there is a job, you have to do it well, and you go through it, and at the end it produces a result, right?
mm,
But you're not throwing the dice, right? Here
mm,
you may work on six things, and only three may succeed, and three may not go anywhere, right? And you don't know which three it is, and if you choose wrongly, five may go down the drain, right? And
yeah,
then you're wasted the time and effort of the company and the whole team. So uh, so to be able to manage and handle rejection, to be able to ask stuff that we earlier used to hesitate to ask, is a key muscle that I myself had to develop. So yeah,
yeah.
I agree with you.
Beautifully said. Uh, just calling out a couple of gold in what you just said. One is taking things personal, right? And I think that is definitely something we all had to outgrow, because it is never personal. And but it does seem like it. It does seem like it when you call a customer, or when you and at any level, right? You could be the CEO of your company, and if you sent a email out to another CEO, and the other CEO rejects your request, you could take it personally. It could happen at any level. It's a very human thing. And there's no no alternative but to keep that out and stay focused on the fact that you have a job to do, and you are in somewhere. I like the American football analogy, metaphor a lot, in especially when you look at these some of these things. It's about moving the ball forward, and it's not personal. Somebody could hit you, you could fall, you could get hurt. None of that is personal. The idea is just to keep the ball moving forward. And as a salesperson, you are out there in the front, and probably a quarterback most times. And if you don't throw the ball to the right direction, you may not get to the touchdown, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So um, leads me to another point in what you were saying, which is system thinking. Okay, and I know, having known you personally very well and worked with you closely, one of the things I've seen that worked about you was because of your consulting background. You bring a certain system thinking off the bat. Okay, and as people, like, if I started at sales ground zero and all the way up, and I had to develop that capability. I had to realize that, oh my god, I don't understand business. I understand the sales transaction, I understand how to handle people, but I don't understand the business. And but in your case, because you had consulting as a background, I think you had a certain advantage. You took off the bat. So talk a little bit about that. How you feel that's helped you. And I definitely think it's helped you, because when we work together, you've always brought that element. And talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I guess we both had to build kind of different muscles to get to where we are today. And you came in natively having exercised certain muscles in your early career, and not having exercised a few others, and I keep on exercising the other muscles and not exercising the ones that you have, right? Like for example, handling rejection and popping the question and being willing to go out there, and that is something that I had to develop way late in my career because I've never done it, right? And that's something that you used to do natively, right? Simply because you've done it before. And and on the other hand, I had spent that time doing consulting, and I'd spent the time
Mm.
at that time, and also the MBA helped as well, right? I remember Steve Jobs' autobiography. He said things like, you never know what happens in your past that's going to help you in your future, right? And he
Mm.
talked about being interested in calligraphy at some point, and it made a difference in the iPhone. So you never know which aspect of your past impacts you. So in my case, the consulting has hugely helped, right? For two reasons. Consulting and the MBA, I kind of club them together because they kind of having, the same muscles are being exercised.
Mhm.
One is, the understanding of business before we understand IT, right? We're all IT services
Mm.
providers, but at the end
Mm.
of the day, we are the IT of the kind is serving a business need, right? And so, what is that business trying to accomplish? What are the pressures on that business? What is changing about their business, right?
Yeah.
You know, in my client's world, right, things used to change once every 20 years. Then they start changing once every 10 years. Now they change every 6 months, right? And that's what their business has to kind of fight for. The competition is different, right? And how does IT keep pace with that, right? So why they are doing what they are doing was the starting point in my case, simply because that's where I grew up, and that helps me a lot, right? So when that helps me not only in doing my job better, but also being able to represent ourselves with more senior people on the client side, right? Because the
Yeah.
higher they rise in the IT hierarchy on the client environment, the more connected they are to their business, and if we can
Yeah.
speak the business language up front, you connect with the higher levels of the organization quicker, right? Second is, consulting has helped me with, consulting MBA. I always, math and numbers used to be something that I like,
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with. So that is so much an essential piece, right? We consume numbers and we breathe numbers every single day. And I'm not talking about targets alone, right? I'm talking about business cases and ROIs and investments and so many different things. And when you put yourself in the shoes of somebody else on the client side who has to take a decision, who has to justify the decision, get budgets for the decision, you work out what they would be doing, and you
Hmm.
basically you give them something that they can use. You give them
Hmm.
the ammunition that they can use in accomplishing what they have to do to get the budgets, right? So you it helps you think one or two levels deeper.
Yeah.
It helps you solve the problems that are eventually going to hit your clients, which they may be trying to solve by themselves, right? And your background can be helpful there, right? Similarly, I would also credit, I've had the good fortune of working in delivery for a while and in HR for a while. Those have been very helpful as well. As I mean, on the delivery front, at the end of the day, when I'm selling to somebody who's delivering, right?
Yeah.
So they are responsible for program delivery. They're responsible for assuring certain results within a certain amount of time and a budget, and to achieve a certain outcome.
Yeah.
And if me having lived that life in the past helps me empathize and understand what they're going through. Similarly, people, right? When you're in HR, you deal with people and you understand what their motivations are and how it behaves. And they are also solving people problems,
Yeah.
right? They're also solving org problems, right? So those various experiences have helped me to understand their people problems, their org problems, their sense of what they need to deliver, their sense of how they can get the budget for it, their sense of why they're doing it, what their business needs. So it helps me appreciate the context better. What I had to build in terms of my muscle is the content of selling itself. What does selling
Hmm.
mean? How to ask for a meeting, and what kind of negotiations happen. That was new for me, which I had to develop more recently, right? Maybe in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that is fantastic. Couple of things I want to call out, right? And this is for people in sales or in a journey of sales career. What you just said is very, very important. One is, I think, because you had a consulting background, you were trained in thinking system. You're thinking, you knew the business, and you were relating to a conversation in the context of a bigger uh, you know business process, if you will. And I think we all, as salespeople, need to develop that muscle. I've had to invest time, energy, read books, do courses to to develop that. And I find that sometimes when I speak to a lot of other salespeople, especially during interviewing process, they miss that, and the whole focus is on relationships. Sales is all about relationships. I don't think so. That those days are gone. If you are a salesperson, I think, Santosh, what you just said is a very, very valuable asset, according to me. And if you don't have it, you got to develop it. If not earlier, later. The second thing you mentioned was a very powerful point, which is empathy. And because you had the opportunity to work in other areas, you have empathy for what they do and bring to the table. And I think that's again a big gap I see as salespeople. We tend to overlook because we are out there in the front. It's like you're a soldier, and the enemy line, you're the enemy's right in front, and the stress is high. Clearly, the stress is high, and it's difficult at times to. And your expectations are all the functions behind you just understand you, right? You get so upset when you get a little bit of a pushback or a bit of a lack of understanding from other groups within the company, because you suddenly feel entitled that, hey, I'm in front of the enemy line and this bullets being fired at me, and I expect 100% alignment. But I think the reality is not that. The reality is that you have to remember that, okay, there is enemy line fire happening. Put that aside. You got to turn inwards and turn to your colleagues or other functions and empathize with what they're trying to deal with, what their constraints are, and have to solve their problems if you have to deal with the enemy line, right? And um, and I think your experience with HR and in people's business for sure, and engineering was is very crucial. And even if you're selling a product, because if you don't understand what engineering department and R&D is dealing with, and you just expect magic, it's not going to happen, right? And you can only be frustrated. And I see that happen a lot of it for us in sales. And what does it lead to? Well, again, by the time you're 40, you will be in a hospital with high BP and diabetes. The only thing to do is to take a leaf from what you've done, Santosh, is to, if you're not working on those departments, at least spend time to understand what they do, right? Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, yes, and I want to do make 2 points, right? One is on rotation, right, which I believe is very important. Second is on the metaphor itself, right? I'd like to offer an alternative metaphor, right? The metaphor that works for me more, right? So the soldier metaphor is very common, and I totally get it why, right? And
Hmm.
especially I associate the soldier metaphor with the hunting part of the organization, right?
Hmm.
Those that are
Hmm.
trying to out there in the red ocean, trying to fight against the competitors to get the attention of a new client. It's a
Right.
very apt metaphor. I and many times our industry people lapse into a servant positioning, right?
Hmm.
You tell me what to do. I'm there, loyal, faithful. I'm there to do it. Tell me, if you ask me to jump, I'll ask you how high, right?
Hmm.
So that is, we kind of devolve into that positioning sometimes, right? Some of the
Yeah.
industry. So I kind of like to position what we do, especially with strategic clients, right? In a long-term relationship, is a doctor positioning, right?
Hmm.
It is, your client is your patient, right?
Yeah.
They have things to solve, right? They come to you because they respect you. They're willing to pay good money for your services because you do them well, right? You've done them well in the past, and you will tell them stuff that is unpleasant, but they need to know,
Hmm.
right? And you're a surgeon, right? So when you do stuff, you do it well, precisely, right? And you have your back end. You have the people who pass on the instruments to you, the people who maintain your office, who manage your appointments. That's your business, right? You take care
Hmm.
of it, right? I am there to see the person who's going to advise me and help me get a better understanding of my own problem, is going to give me unpleasant messages when I need them, and still going to maintain a decent relationship. I'm not going to go to a doctor who is necessarily rude to me or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Or doesn't have the
Hmm.
time for me. So
Yeah.
this person has the time for me. And if I want to understand details, they'll explain it to me, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, they keep things simple, right? So, it reminds me of another nice saying that says complexity is like underwear, right? Or
Hmm.
underclothing. You
Hmm.
know, sometimes it slips out, but you try and cover it anyway, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you keep it simple. Doctor's not trying to tell you I'm doing this, I'm this, using this
Yeah.
instrument and doing this procedure. They just tell you, hey, here's the benefit,
Yeah.
right? Here are the choices, right? Here's what I recommend you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would like to offer that as a metaphor when people are actually looking at serving sophisticated clients, large
Yeah. Yeah.
relationships, right? And think, what would my doctor do, right?
Yeah.
Now, to your second point on getting experience in different functions, see, I am a believer in the fact that people need to be multidimensional in terms of their understanding of their environment, right? Of their own company, right? Of the different departments. So I love these rotation programs where people join the company, they spend some time in delivery, they spend some time in finance, they spend some time in marketing, they finally decide where they want to go. But many of us have not had that luxury of having grown up like that, right?
Mhm.
So in my particular case, and SK, you're well aware of it, I almost created a rotation for myself, high risk, because when you're very well established in one function,
Yeah.
to let go of it, right? Let go of the security that comes with it, and then go and start in a new function absolutely as a beginner.
Yeah.
But you're not a beginner because you've got so many other contexts that you now can drive on, and then force that rotation across functions. I think that companies will serve themselves very well
Mm.
if they offer or demand, that rotations happen. I know of one company, Dell, and I'm talking about Dell. The cell servers and PCs and so on. I've got a close friend working with Dell.
Mhm.
They have this culture that every 2 years they're expected to find a new job within Dell, right? And I'm
Wow.
talking about leadership levels, right?
Mhm.
Like my friend is fairly senior, placed in a senior position there, but they have to find a new position for themselves every 2 years.
Mm. Mm.
And if after 2 years they don't find a new function, it's not as if they'll be thrown out, but it's a stigma, it's a black mark. It means that you
Mm.
couldn't find one. And so when you work with the boss and the boss likes you, they've got a good working relationship, they respect you. When they go to a new function, you're likely to get pulled there too, because they
Mm.
need to succeed in the new function in a period of 2 years. So they want to bet on people they know, and you need to change functions anyway. So they have this leadership in constant motion by design.
Mm. Mm.
I love that setup. Now, it's not practical to always have a setup like that, but being open to having these experiences is great. But at the very least, they should do what you said, right? Which is turn around, look at your internal departments, spend some time, understand what they
Yeah.
do, and empathize. So I hope that
Beautiful.
helped. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think if you don't have the luxury of working in a corporation that provides you this opportunity, it's upon you, right? It's because I find there is a contrarian view in hiring process. For example, um, I've heard a lot of friends and colleagues look at certain resumes and say, "Why is this person moving around every 2 3 years? Not stable." That's the first comment that comes. You know, and there may be merit to it. And so, because there is a view in sales, this is purely in sales, is that it takes a salesperson at least 18 months to be fully contributing to a job in a company. It takes 18 months. You got to understand the culture, you got to understand the market, and especially in B2B complex sales. So if a person has been moving every 2 years, what does it mean? Is the first question that pops up, and it 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 becomes a negative notation in the resume. So I don't know how one would, because in other functions that's not the case, right? If you're in engineering, you are applauded to go out and try something new after 2 3 years, because the belief is that you can be a contributing member in the 1 year you're in engineering or HR or accounting. But in sales, no, it takes a couple of years for you to truly produce value in a complex environment. So that's going to be kind of a tricky, but still, maybe 3 4 years, if not 1 or 2 years, right, for sales. Let's say you had a good
Right,
stint, right?
right now. So I agree with you. Like you remarked about the 21 years that I spent at Emphasis, right? So again, my salesperson days were maybe 3 or 4 years, and then before I took on this role. But I do see, right, 18 months is a good low end number, right, in
Mm,
terms of sometimes it takes longer than that, because maybe you've got long term relations with the client, they have to accept you
mm,
too, right, not just your
yeah,
company. You have to form the tribal networks within your company to make sure that you have all your relationships, and then you
yeah.
can bring the village together whenever you want. So yes, job hopping for the sake of the next 10% higher or whatever is, uh, I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah,
Right? I think you're giving up way more, and you're undervaluing yourself by getting the 10% raise and moving on. Right?
yeah.
Um, now many companies are friendly to employees choosing to make rotations or experimenting in different areas. Right? Like, for example,
Mm,
my current company. Right? It was just completely out of the ordinary for somebody to go and say, "Hey, listen, I want to spend some time in HR." Right?
mm,
But it was fine by them, right?
mm,
They made it happen, right? And the chief HR officer also was like, hey, listen, I get a different point of view in my team, so
mhm,
why not, right? So sometimes those experiments are not as scary, right, as you think, because it's not like you do have a safety net, you have equity. If you want to try something new, isn't it the best place to try the place which understands you best, right? So you can try something new. If it fails, they know that this experiment was not as successful, but you've actually done great stuff for the company anyway, right?
Yeah.
uh, so that's my point of view, right? So when
Yeah.
people have long
Totally.
stints, use it to get the diverse experience that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned another point that I think is gold again, equity. So equity definitely within the company in the context of what you're saying, but also equity with. So the other way to look at this is if you're a salesperson, you are building equity in the industry, and then the company becomes actually uh, transient in a way, and that comes brings me to an important point in my view, which is branding, personal branding, and it also connects to what you just said earlier, which is about thinking about yourself as a doctor, not a soldier. Because if you have to be a doctor, first you have somebody has to give you the listening as a doctor. So if I walk into somebody's room, they should look at me and say, oh yeah, you're a doctor. I mean, so there is a process involved in first establishing that you are a doctor, which could mean your history, background, relationships as well. And so that's one part of it, which if you're in a hunting kind of a role, when you're opening new doors, you don't have that luxury. Nobody cares who you are. They're talking to you because of probably a company backing, and if you're working with a startup, nobody knows who you are. So there's a lot. That's probably a topic of a podcast by itself, right? How do you build that as a hunter? How do you build personal branding? But also, but it's important, right? Because if you have to be a doctor, if you're in an existing customer relationship, if you're running an existing mature business, uh,
Hmm.
people are looking at you with some level of respect already. They value your opinion, and so you can leverage it. But in the case of funding new business, you don't have that. But there are other ways to get to that, right? So so two words I loved in what you said. One is equity, uh, which is a process by itself, and second is taking looking at yourself as a doctor, right?
Wonderful. Yeah, I
And
agree.
that's a topic of a book by itself. Outside the scope of this podcast. We'll need 3 more hours to discover that. But something to think about. Something to think about.
Right, right, right. I agree.
Beautiful, Santosh. I think we covered a lot of ground in the conversation, and I hope for the viewer who's listening to this, we were sharing our experience and view. And if you're in starting in sales, or if you're looking to have a career in sales, or if you're if you're in a rut, I think some of the ideas that we discussed today are very valuable, and we've all dealt with all of that in all our careers, right? So that's a beautiful conversation. All right, anything else you want to bring up before we
So,
move to the next
uh,
part of the conversation?
okay, I was just maybe you were intending to ask that, but I was reminded of one of our older conversations where we were talking about artificial intelligence and if something
Yes.
like that would ever impact the sales function, right? There's so many
Yeah.
things that AI is becoming smarter and capable of making judgments. Is the sales role
Yes.
something that is susceptible to that as well, right? I'd
Yes.
love to hear your thoughts, and I'll share mine as well.
Awesome. That's something that I think about all the time. And I'll tell you where I think about it is when I go to a store, and especially when I. So there are two types of purchases I make. I look at it from from a buyer perspective to see whether I'm relevant to another buyer, right? So there are stores like Amazon is where everyone buys everything these days, right? And I always wonder what happens to the mom and pop shops and what happens to the retail stores that's in my neighborhood. Because if they shut down, I don't think I want them to shut down. I don't want Amazon to be this omnipresent retailer for the world. I'd like shops to be in my neighborhood, right? So I make a conscious effort to go to these shops. There are two kinds of experiences I have in these shops. One is I walk into a shop, nobody says even a hello to you. Okay, they're just doing what they're doing, and you just walk around the aisle. Nobody even asks what you're there for. I have to look up. Sometimes I don't even feel they want to talk to me. So that's one experience I have, and I'm very clear. This shop doesn't need to exist. I'd rather be in Amazon, and buying and saving time. And then there are other shops like we're endurance sports enthusiasts, and uh, I buy running shoes. And recently, as I was sharing with you, I'm jumping into the world of triathlons, and I had to buy a whole bunch of equipment for my so bicycle shops or swim shops, specialized swim shops. You walk in there, that's the place I would always go. I will not buy those things from Amazon. Why? Because when I walk in there, first of all, I've seen these are personally owned shops, um, and the owner is there, and the first thing they greet you. They say, "Hey, welcome to this. I'll get." If they are busy, they'll tell you, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." I really appreciate that. It means that I got acknowledged. I got acknowledged when I got into that space. And the second thing is expertise, right? I don't have the time to figure out if I have to buy a swimming fin. I just bought a swimming fin recently. I had to buy a bunch of things for my swimming training. What kind of shorts, between triathlons and regular swimming. There's so much information, tribal knowledge. I get that tribal knowledge from this person in the shop, and it could be either the owner or it could be somebody working there. But they're so passionate about what they're doing. They love the sport, so they come to me. They give me so much education, and I've seen that even in certain shops which sell cameras, for example, photography, for example. These are people who love what they do. So, long story short, I don't think AI is going to replace that, right? Which is you can't automate that. You can't automate passion. You can't automate empathy, like you just said. You can't automate. When I say empathy, that's the root of human relationship. You can't automate that. No way. At least as of now. Okay. So that to me is a place where I think, aha, if I have to be valuable in my role in a sales function, I need to bring that level of experience for my buyer. Even if it is virtual, even if I'm on a Zoom call, am I connecting with this person? Is this person feeling that am I neglecting them, ignoring them, or do they feel that I actually acknowledge their presence? Just human experience, right? So to me, that's what I am, at least now at this point in time, thinking that I don't think AI will get there yet. That's Our brains are far too complex to replicate, at least from what we know today in technology. And yeah, that's my 2 cents at least.
No, no, that's wonderful. I can totally relate to every word that you said. I'll give the analogy of REI. So when I went on my Camino de Santiago about, well, it's 5 years to the day now. Not to the day, but well, this month, right? I remember going to REI with no clue of what does it mean, right? To go do something like this, right? And there was individuals who explained to me what kind of shoes I should be looking for, what I should not
Yeah.
buy, what impact it will have on that day. Fitting, right? I got fitted for a backpack. I remember you got fitted for a bike, right? That is a personalized function, right?
Yes.
And I remember the same experience at Home Depot, right? You go in. I once went there and said, "Look, I want to put a backsplash in my kitchen. I have no idea what to do, where to start. Tell me." He asked, "How big is your kitchen dimensions?" I said, "Oh, I have no idea," right? And then he smiled, and from there he took me through materials and what I should do. And at the end of the day, at the end of that week, I had done my backsplash project, right?
Yeah.
So and then they were happy to take back what I didn't use. So it was amazing. What an experience, right? So I agree with you. Empathy and these kind of personalized relationships cannot be replaced. But I do think there's an enabler, right? For example,
Mm,
if I own an REI, right? If I know that like 4 years back you were running, but now you're biking, right?
mm,
And I would say, hey, were you a runner before, right?
mm.
And so have you moved to triathlons? Have you switched to biking, right? It's
Right.
a nice question to ask.
Right.
And I would expect that a machine would remind me, hey, that this customer is buying bicycle stuff now, but they used to buy running stuff for 10 years, like
Right.
until last year. So then it allows me to even more sharpen, some
Yeah.
might consider it inauthentic, but it's about me taking care to know and remember, or to find out and then to address you
Yeah.
in a way where you feel even more connected. So that I can see machines doing. But yeah, I'm with you that we are not ready to be automated out yet.
Yeah. You know, I live in the world of AI now in my job, and I work with some really big platform companies that are pushing the limit. NVIDIA is one, so I work very closely with that platform. It's the last annual meet of NVIDIA. It was almost like an utopian future, right? And they're talking about this whole multiverse universe that they're creating, right? If that reminds you of Matrix, I won't blame you. They're creating this multiverse universe, which is based off the gaming best practice. So if you talk to gamers today, they live in a virtual world. There are avatars, they have personalities, they live in that world, right? It's an extension of who they are. Now, companies are talking about creating multiverse universes to do a lot of other things, including work, for example. So now that leads me to a question, right? Just from our own sales perspective, how does that impact uh, this profession or the whole B2B transaction in the future? Don't know, but two things that come to mind. One is, if you look at, I think, the Turing test that AI will have to pass to say that they are now close to humans. And if you look at all the science fiction book, and I think science fiction does a great job of predicting the future, right? If you read Isaac Asimov, or if you watch Star Trek, if you watch Star Trek 15 years ago, a lot of what you see today is almost real. And I'm also seeing, you also hear things like technologies are out there that are beginning to disintegrate and reintegrate matter and all that stuff. So hey, nothing is off the charts right now. So let's talk about AI in that context. And if this is like little abstract and woo woo, so be it. But we are in that world, right? We are in the world of technology. So in that sense, let's say tomorrow, if there is a robotic person, let's say I want to walk to the same store, and there is this three-dimensional figure. Now you've seen a lot of these doggies, dogs running around. You've seen that. You kick them, they come back, they act like a dog, right? And dog consciousness is very limited, right? There's a spectrum in which a dog operates. You give it something, it salivates, it eats, and it becomes your friend. And it's a very narrow spectrum. But humans is a broad spectrum, right? It's a broad spectrum. You can't motivate a human just with one thing, right? You got to many things. So now, if you look at something like that, maybe like if you walked into a store and there is this robotic three-dimensional figure, and to what you said, enablement today, but that enablement is fit into this three-dimensional figure, and he or she is able to interact with you intelligently, then what happens?
Right. No, I get the premise of the question, and if there were, let's say, a robotic salesperson who knows how to greet me, responds to my questions in context, right? Remember stuff that I told them the previous time, right? Helps me fit. You never know, right?
Yeah,
We have to retrain ourselves to kind of interact with this humanoid, but maybe that will become a new normal too, right? We're interacting with our phones, we're interacting with Siri and talking about her, right?
yeah, yeah,
Or the GPS voice. I remember my daughter used to say, "Why is she speaking today?" And I'm like, "Who's she?" Or GPS, right? So it's
yeah,
no longer it; it's she, right?
yeah, yeah,
So yes, who knows, right? I mean,
yeah,
the Japanese have been having like pets, right?
yeah,
Pet dogs to take care of their elder. But fortunately, in our kind of selling environments, right, which are high involvement, right, it's not like we are selling 50 things every day, right? We're probably selling like five things a quarter, right?
yeah,
And these are all, each individual situation is complex, right? And good part is the need to automate is not there, right? so
yeah.
so robotic
As of now,
competition
you
is
guys are good. We are all okay. Ne-
because you're dealing with, dealing with
yeah,
complex situations, and you're dealing with few of them. And I'm just saying, a company of 25,000 will have the 100 to 200 people in some kind of a selling function. Why would you automate the 100 200? You'll automate the 25,000 first, right?
yeah,
So if automation were to provide the benefit, so one is the demand, and second is it doesn't make sense to go in that direction, right?
yeah, yeah,
So hopefully not, but I can, yeah, robots are going to be like much fitter. They age better than probably as humans
Yeah.
do. So they can build a robot like that. You can keep selling for a 200 years, right? Whereas the
Yeah.
person has a career.
Or like Yuval Harari says in his book, I think the future is more of a hybrid kind of a being, which is human beings, fit with
Enhanced,
artificial intelligence,
right?
right?
Enhanced with extensions that make them better than who they are, what they
Yeah,
are.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
So IQ at birth becomes immaterial.
no, that's what the Google Glass and stuff like that was about, right? Like you see a person and it tells you who that person is, and
Yeah.
it helps you remember the last time you met them. And now you suddenly appear intelligent because hey, Mr. Roberts, I met you like 6 months back at that conference, and it's a Google Glass that told you, right?
Yes.
So
So in all my podcasts, I have one section which is called the fun Q&A round for my guest, and
okay,
I know the last time you were my guest, I didn't have that. So let's do it this time, right?
okay.
Um, so you
I
ready
hope
for
it's about
that?
running shoes. Sure,
This time it's no running. We're running is out of
sure.
scope for this conversation. At least we won't have robots to run. I think you will
Well,
have to
that's a
do
robot I could use. They will run for me while I.
while you get fit. Transfer learning. That's a word I
Yeah.
keep hearing nowadays. The robot does the workout and does transfer learning to you, so you get fit. That's
Uh,
useful. Okay, ready?
sure.
All right. So the first question is, what's been the worst thing of being a sales leader?
Hmm. What's the worst thing? Well, it's hard to think of too many bad things actually. um, I would basically call that whole. It's not bad. It's just that it's a readjustment I had to make. Right. I would call that whole readjustment of you know uh, being greedy for greedy sake is an
Uh,
interesting one. Right. And the whole process of making my peace with it. I think that is something that I would pick out. But it's yeah, I can't think of too many things that are bad out of the bat. But that would be one readjustment that I'll pick that was particularly hard.
okay, okay, all right. The best advice you got in your career?
So this was early in my sales days, right? But somebody said the harder you work, the luckier you get, right?
Hmm.
And that kind of stayed with me because people talk about they try and compare. Hey, listen, oh, that guy just landed a windfall just like that, and oh, it's so great that he just went there at the same time they were taking the decision. The timing was great. But but that's survivor bias, right? That looks at the one thing that actually worked and talking about it as if it's an isolation, right?
Hmm.
But what behind it was months and months of preparation. One of our board members actually once said that you always be ready to give a high five, right? To your client, right? And you go and you extend your hand and there's no return high five. Then next day you go and return your hand, no high five, right? But after 2 months of this, one day there'll be a hand that will actually come and
Hmm.
return the high five, right? And it's made. So what you have to do, what you have to do, right?
Yeah,
And you have to keep doing it, right? So I like this whole the way it was worded, right? The harder you work, the luckier you get, right? People underestimate that and don't see that about the selling function. So that I would pick as something that stayed
yeah,
with me.
yeah. No, that's well said. Well said. That's a great message. That's a great message. And I think it also kind of adds to the fact that there are challenging times as a salesperson you will go through, and this message, this response that you gave makes a lot of sense, because you got to stay focused on keep doing what you got to do and trust the process, right? All right. A movie that's inspired you.
Um, I will knowing that I'm changing the question, I'll change the question a little bit. I'll take that liberty. But this Glengarry Glen Ross that I brought up, that's a nice movie about selling and it's almost like look into another world of sales that I'm just not familiar with, right? This whole everyday banging on the head with a hammer, right? and trying to get them to, trying to get a herd of people who are all different to behave in one way, right? Because the whiteboard tells them to do so, right? It kind of exposed me to that selling environment and helped me appreciate the differences between, the complex selling that we do, right? And that's also complex, right? It's psychology and all of that, right?
Yeah.
But the psychology of so I would not call it an inspirational movie, but I'll call it a movie that if you have been selling at some point in your life, it will stay with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
I'll pick that. Yeah.
a place you want to travel once the pandemic comes to an end.
How much time do you have?
Let's pick with your top two, maybe, if you have a long list.
Okay, no, I will pick one. So I am a history buff,
Hmm.
right? And places of places where the more ancient history has happened, those are places that draw me to them, right? I love Rome. I've been there. I love Istanbul. Was on top of my list until I actually got go there and see it. And wow, it just you get goosebumps, imagining the kind of events that have happened there and the personalities that have been there. Jerusalem is on top of the list.
Hmm.
Now, with what's happening in the news, I would say that not only the pandemic, but what was happening in Israel is going to push it further away, in terms of a travel destination. But that's certainly a destination that I want to go to. It's just too much history. There's Roman history, there's Christian history, right? There's food. So, yep, that's the one I'll pick.
All
Though
right.
the list is long and there are many names just below it, this is the one I'll pick.
Yeah. Awesome. And the last one is a favorite question I have for all my guests, which is, if a movie were made of you, okay, what genre would it be? And who would you like to play you?
Oh my God. um, I think it would be a travel movie,
Hmm.
right? A movie about keeping moving, right?
Hmm.
If I look at the most fun parts of my life, it's a time when I've always kept moving and seen new people, experienced new places,
Hmm.
eaten new stuff, and I like to go for my long walks now. I went for my Camino. I kept moving about in my profession. So the idea of having a home in motion, right? Being at home while continuously moving is something that always appeals to me. So it will definitely be a travel movie. And who would play it? Why can't I play it?
Sure.
That's one more skill to pick up. I don't know who will watch it, but I'd love to play
All right. Let's send you the script then.
it. And the tickets.
Tickets first. We'll figure out it. We were selling. We're
Yeah.
going to sell the tickets. We're going to sell the tickets.
Wonderful.
All right, Santosh, that was a fantastic conversation. Lot of insights, a lot of gold in what we talked about. Very relevant conversations in today's world. Um, any wrap up message you want to give to the audience before we wrap the session?
So first of all, thanks, Don. I enjoy the conversation too. It's always nice to catch up and banter with you, and this was no different. Um, so, the one thing that of all the things that we spoke about, I would urge people to consider is to actually force changes in their environment, right? So to
Mm,
actually to when we spoke about rotation and moving functions, I would urge everybody to experience a different job than what they are doing today,
mm,
and it could be jobs that are around the function that they do today, or in a more romantic sense, right? Try something totally different, completely different, right? To go teach for a while. I think the immersion that it gives you, right? People say follow the money, right?
mm,
Follow the money in the sense that if you follow the trail of money, it'll lead you to all the sources of motivation in that environment, right?
mm.
So what it is to live like a teacher, what it is to live like a finance person, what it is like, I think it's immensely insightful, and it can help you do your job better as well. So I would say rotate your job function. That's one message I would leave.
Awesome. Beautiful. All right. So, we're coming to end of our conversation. Thanks for your time, Santosh. I'll let you have the rest of the day. and we shall stay in touch.
Absolutely. I look forward to the video whenever it is released, and awesome conversation. Thank you for including me.
Thank you.
Have a good Sunday, SK.